What is going on, everyone? It is Connor, the co-host with the most, back with another Clutch Crew Sports 2022 College Football Conference preview, and this time we're going to be looking at the Big 12 Conference. We've got two conferences left. This is the second to last conference. We've already covered the American Athletic Conference, the Pac-12, the ACC, and the Big 10. So we have the Big 12 coming up in this episode, and then the final two episodes coming out on the next couple of Saturdays are going to be about the SEC, the SEC East and West, respectively. But this is going to be about the 10 teams in the Big 12, ranking them, my personal preseason rankings for them. And disclaimer for this list is that this was a very tough set of teams to list. Like, the Big 12 is so wide open this year that, you know, it's not like with other conferences like the SEC and the Big 10 where it's like, okay, there's kind of like an established power structure, like, you know, these teams are at the top and then these teams are at the bottom. But, you know, while there is that to a certain degree, like there definitely are the upper teams, just the parity between these teams is really small. So it really could go any way in my mind. Like any of the top four teams in my mind could win the conference. You know, some of the teams in the lower end of the conference that I have, you know, they could finish higher, they could finish lower, who knows. This is going to be a very exciting conference to watch just because of all the uncertainty surrounding it. So it is highly possible that when I come back and look at this video at the end of the college football season, the final standings could be very different from what I predicted. So, but let's get right into it. And of course, at number 10, we're going to have the Kansas Jayhawks, probably the single most certain thing in these rankings for the Big 12 is that the Kansas Jayhawks are going to finish last. You know, I talked in the last video in the Big 10 East about Rutgers being a laughingstock of a football team. Kansas is another one of those laughingstock football teams. Like, Kansas is definitely the epitome of a basketball school. You know, they have a great basketball team. They just won a national championship in basketball. You know, a lot of history there, but their football team is really, really bad and has been really bad for quite a while now. They haven't even been to a bowl game since like 2008, which is, you know, it's really easy to get into a bowl game these days, and the fact that they've gone that long without being in a bowl game is pretty embarrassing. You know, they were 1-8 in the conference last year, 2-10 overall. They did somehow manage to get a win over Texas last year. That was their one conference win. But their only other win came against an FCS team, and they were celebrating like it was, you know, like they had just won the national championship. They were so happy they won that game because were on this incredibly bad losing streak. And then it's like, wow, you have to, you know, in order to break that losing streak, you had to beat an FCS team. So, not good for the Kansas Jayhawks. But looking at their schedule here, you know, one thing I do like about the Big 12 is that every team plays every team. You know, there's no, oh, well, you know, so-and-so didn't have to play so-and-so. Like, no, they all play each other. Which, honestly, I wish all the conferences were like that to some extent. I know it's kind of not possible with the ACC and the Big 10. Like, the conferences that have more teams. But when your conference only has 10 teams, you know, I definitely think it would be an advantage to have everybody play everybody. So like I said, there's none of this like, oh, well, Oklahoma didn't have to play Baylor, or, oh, like, Texas didn't have to play Oklahoma State. Like, there's none of that happening. They all play each other. And going up and down this list, you know, trying to find a winnable game for them. I mean, obviously the game against Tennessee Tech is winnable, but other than that, I mean, I just signaled out their key game as their home game against Duke on September 24th because, honestly, in my mind, that's the most winnable game on this schedule outside of the Tennessee Tech game. You know, even like, you know, some of the lower teams in the Big 12, like Texas Tech, they got to play in West Virginia, like they got to play them on the road. You know, they draw Houston as their other non-conference opponent, which is not going to be a win, so we're just going to stick with Duke being their key game because, like I said, that's their most winnable game in my mind besides the game against Tennessee Tech at the start of the season. Although, when it does come to the experience rank, this team is 2nd out of 10 when it comes to that. Not sure how good that is for a team that finished 2-10 last year. Their program status is just win games, you know, just try and win some games because that's something they've struggled with a lot. Their key player is going to be running back Devin Neal. He's basically the only good thing about this team. When I was like looking through their players and, you know, like who's coming back, who had good seasons last year, he had a pretty decent season last year, and he was about the only one on this entire team that did. So if they want any hopes of winning anything, any games at all, Devin Neal's going to have to be the guy to step up and, you know, get it done for them because Kansas is definitely a joke of a FBS football team. They should give up their spot in the Big 12 to someone more deserving, even though I know that'll never happen because, unless they start differentiating between football and basketball, like Kansas is never going to lose their spot in the Big 12 just because of how much of a basketball powerhouse they are. Enough about Kansas. Moving on to number 9 is going to be the Texas Tech Red Raiders. They finished 5th in the conference last year. They were 3-6 in the conference, 7-6 overall. I'm guessing this. I don't know how they ended up in. I'm guessing this whatever. I got these standings off the Athletic, and I just now realized this. I guess they were going by overall record rather than conference record, because in the conference they were finishing down, in below Iowa State and West Virginia, but I don't know. That's how the Athletic did it. So, but Texas Tech coming in at number 9. My key game for them, they have a little bit of a tough non-conference schedule. Another one of these Big 12 teams that draws Houston, like that's going to be a really tough game. They have to go on the road and play NC State. That's probably going to be a loss. So another tough non-conference schedule, but I have their key game. It's actually the same week as the Kansas Duke game. It's their home game on September 24th against Texas. A big rivalry game. Texas Tech, they've had a lot of troubles trying to beat Texas over the past few seasons. But Texas is vulnerable. They're one of those teams that seems to always have. I mean, I'll get into this a little bit more later, but they're one of those teams that always seems to have expectations, but then they go and do something like lose to someone like Texas Tech. So, that's definitely a key game for me for them. Like I said, a rivalry game, one they always want to win. Rivalry games are always close. Unless there's just like this huge disparity between the teams, which I really kind of don't particularly see. Like there is a gap for sure, but it's not as big as some people probably think it is. So I definitely can see Texas Tech could possibly win that game if everything goes right. More than likely they'll probably lose, but they're going to play hard because they want to win that game. They rank 3rd out of 10 in the 2022 experience rank. Their program status is figure out who the quarterback's going to be and establish a winning culture under new head coach Joey McGuire. They have a quarterback battle going on right now. It's looking like the QB is probably going to be Tyler Show. It's definitely important especially for these Big 12 teams that really aren't, the Big 12 isn't known for defense. They're known for offense. They're known for having really high-powered, potent offenses and pretty terrible defenses. So it's really important to get your quarterback position figured out if that's going to be the case for you. So definitely want to do that. Their key player is going to be wide receiver Miles Price. That is the one bright spot on this Texas Tech team a bit, is their wide receiver core is decently talented. It's not like a top 15 unit or anything, but if I had to pick one of the strengths of this team, it's probably going to be the wide receiver unit, and Miles Price is the leader of that. So when you have some good wide receivers, it can really help when you have, quarterback uncertainty. At least whoever's going to be in there playing, they should be able to get the ball to these guys pretty consistently. So that's going to be for Texas Tech. At number 8, we're going to have the West Virginia Mountaineers. They were 7th in the conference last year, 4-5 in the conference, 6-7 overall. So yeah, I don't know how these standings were done here, but that's blame the Athletic. So yeah, that's where they finished last year. They are, they have a program that, they have a 4-year head coach. They, trying to get off the ground, trying to get some more wins going. West Virginia in recent years has definitely been more of a basketball school. But looking at their schedule here, they have a bit of an easier non-conference schedule, except for the first game. They do have to go at Pitt. That's probably going to be a loss. But they do have a game at Virginia Tech, which I see they could possibly win that. It just depends on how things go. It is going to be tough on the road to go play Virginia Tech, but we'll see what happens there. My key game for them is going to be October 29th against TCU at home. They, unfortunately, for some of their more winnable conference games against like Iowa State and Texas Tech and teams like that, they have to go on the road. They do get TCU at home. They're also going at Oklahoma State, in Texas, so that'll also be tough. But TCU for me, West Virginia, they're a really weird team in the Big 12 because they don't have any real established rivalries in the Big 12, given that, they're not anywhere near any of these other teams when it comes to proximity. literally every team in the Big 12 aside from West Virginia is either in Texas, Oklahoma, or Kansas, and West Virginia is all the way over here, closer to the East Coast. So it's really hard to try and pick out like a marquee matchup for them because they don't have any real rivalries in this conference. But so I'm just going to go with a game that seems winnable to me, and that's going to be at home against TCU. Hopefully trying to get some more wins. Again, they were 4-5 last year, so not terrible. But you definitely want to get conference wins, especially when you have to go on the road against some of these other winnable ones. You have to win your home ones. That game against TCU and the game against Kansas State, like those are going to be really important home conference matchups for them, because like I said, they have to go on the road against Texas Tech and against Iowa State. So and I don't see them beating any of the other top 4 teams. So they are going to rank 9th out of 10 in the experience rank. This is a team that was really heavily carried by its defense last year, and unfortunately for them, they did lose a lot of pieces on that defense, hence their 9th in the experience rank. So their program status is going to be rebuilding the defense and just making it back to a bowl game, because they're not going to compete for a Big 12 championship, but, just getting back to the bowl games, that's like, even though it's really easy to get into bowl games these days, it's still kind of a slight status of respectability to at least just like, okay, we can make it to a bowl game. We're playing into January, so at least, or into late December, not really January because that's the New Year's games, but into late December, and, at least we have that going for us. Their key player is going to be quarterback JT Daniels, the transfer from Georgia. He was at USC, he was at Georgia. He never really got any, like, true playing time. He was always involved in quarterback battles. He played a little bit at Georgia, but eventually he lost the starting job. So he did enter the transfer portal, and he came to West Virginia, and he leads, that the offense, like I said, is the experience part of this team. They have 7 returning starters. The defense, like I said, is rebuilding, but Daniels is going to have to step up and lead this offense because, he's obviously an experienced quarterback. He's been in around a couple colleges for 3 to 4 seasons now, so JT Daniels is definitely going to be the key. He's going to determine how far West Virginia goes this year. So at number 7, we're going to have the Iowa State Cyclones. I also realized I made a blunder when I said that all the Big 12 teams were in Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, because I always forget about Iowa State. So there is Iowa State as well. They were 6th in the conference last year. They were 5-4 in conference play, 7-6 overall, which in all honesty means they were actually 4th. Again, don't hate me about these standings. I got them from The Athletic. Blame The Athletic. But so that's going to be... their key game for me is, of course, going to be at Iowa. Their big rivalry game every year that they play with Iowa. I think the trophy for the Cy Hawk Trophy, I believe it is. That's their big game every season, and it's happening early this year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it usually happens a little bit later. I can actually look and see. No, they played Iowa the second week of the schedule last year. Okay, never mind. Yeah, it's all about. They play that game early. I think they lost to Iowa last year, too. Yeah, they lost to Iowa, which in a game that was definitely very winnable for them. That's going to be a key game for me. The rest of their non-conference schedule is easy. They get Ohio and Southeast Missouri State. So if I had to pick some key conference games, they get West Virginia at home. They get Kansas State at home. They get Texas Tech at home. So definitely a lot of winnable conference games there. They also get to play against TCU. They do have to go on the road against TCU, but that could be winnable. And of course, Kansas is pretty much a guaranteed win. So, but that game against Iowa is always fun to watch. So it should be fun to watch again this year. So they're going to be ranked 10th out of 10 in the experience rank. They lost a lot of people last year. This is basically a rebuilding program. That's the program status, to rebuild the team under longtime head coach Matt Campbell. Try for a bowl game. It's Iowa State. Like, normally you'd think a team that's rebuilding this much would be falling near the bottom of the conference, but Iowa State definitely has good recruiting tools. They're one of the better recruiters in the Big 12, so this is why, I kind of was trying to decide where to put them between 6th and 7th. I settled on 7th just because of the experience rank going on here between them and the 6th place team. Their key player is going to be quarterback Hunter Deckers. He's replacing Brock Purdy. Purdy was the starter for a couple seasons. He, had his struggles for sure. Definitely saw it happening in that game against Iowa last year. Purdy made some bad mistakes. But Deckers is going to be, quarterback's the most important position on the team. So, if they can get something established with Hunter Deckers, then they can definitely, get some wins and start doing some good things with this offense that they're rebuilding. It's going to take time. This is definitely a team that will be better next season. So there's not a whole lot of expectations around them this year. Like I said, some people think they can finish as high as 5th or 6th in the conference. I'm going to stick with them being down here just because of, the rebuilding aspect of it. So at number 6, we're going to have the TCU Horned Frogs. They were 9th in the Big 12 last year, 3 and 6th in the conference, 5 and 7 overall. That's actually a correct standing for once. But looking at their schedule, they definitely have an interesting non-conference. They play 2 road games out of conference against Colorado and against SMU. Those could definitely be winnable games. Colorado is definitely, they're a little bit of a question mark. SMU, I can't remember what Zach said about them in the American Athletic Conference, but they could possibly win that too. That's a rivalry game in Texas. Southern Methodist, Texas Christian, that's a big rivalry game. But the key game I have for them is going to be at home on October 22nd against Kansas State. Another case of teams that are really close together in my mind in talent level and where they're going to finish in the standings. And I definitely think that's a winnable game for them against Kansas State. Unfortunately, they do have to go on the road to play Texas and West Virginia, but they do have home games as well against Iowa State and Texas Tech. So, definitely with where I see them as a program, I think the schedule works out pretty favorably for them because, you're not really worried about these games against Oklahoma, Baylor, and OK State just because, they're the upper teams in the conference. I mean, you can tell by the rankings. They already came out with the AP preseason rankings, and they're all within 4 numbers of each other, but it's the rest of these games against the other teams. You could pull an upset here or there somewhere, but TCU definitely should be better this year. They kind of had a disappointing season last year, but they definitely should be better. And one of the reasons why they should be better is that they're first out of the 10 teams in the experience rank. So, they also went through a head coaching change last year, which really, whenever you fire your head coach in the middle of the year and have an interim head coach, it really kind of, sets you up for failure, especially in college. In the NFL, you can sometimes get around it just because, especially if you're on a better team, you have a lot of talent that you can work with, but it's really difficult in college to go through a coaching change in the middle of the season. So their program size is going to be their first full season for new head coach Sonny Dykes, and just get back to respectability because this is the team that has expectations. It's a team that's performed well in the past, and to come out and finish 5 and 7 and 9th in the conference last year is definitely a bit of a disappointment for them. Their key player is going to be wide receiver Tay Barber. Definitely the strength of this TCU team is the wide receiver unit. They have a top 10 wide receiver unit, and all of the top 3 guys are really good, solid starters. And this is an offense that's going to be pass heavy. This offense likes to throw the ball. They're not going to run the ball nearly as often. So these receivers, they have to step up. They have to do well in order to get TCU back to the respectability that they want to get to. Moving on to 5th place in the conference, we have the Kansas State Wildcats. They were 4th in the conference last year, 4 and 5 in conference play, 8 and 5 overall. They definitely have an easy-ish out-of-conference schedule. They get to play South Dakota, Missouri, and Tulane all at home, so definitely good there. Unfortunately for them, this is one of those teams that Kansas State, whenever they play Oklahoma in Manhattan, it's always like an upset watch. But unfortunately, this is the year that they draw the road game against Oklahoma, so I don't see that really being a win for them. Who knows? Maybe they could pull some magic, but I think that's going to be tough. So that's why I labeled their key game as the home game against Oklahoma State on October 29th. Really just a chance for them to get a win against one of these upper teams. They also have the game against Texas right after that on November 5th. That's also very winnable. They got to take advantage of those because they're going on the road against Baylor and on the road against Oklahoma. So if you want to get, one of your big marquee conference wins, it's going to come in one of these 2 games. But I put Oklahoma State on here just because, that would be huge for Kansas State. Like I said, they're one of these teams that seems to pull off an upset every now and then against a top-ranked team. So Oklahoma State definitely should be careful about this matchup. Like, it's not going to be one of those, oh, we're just going to roll into Manhattan and steamroll Kansas State. Like, no, that's an upset watch game in my opinion. So Oklahoma State definitely can't take that game lightly. They are going to be 5th out of 10 in the experience rank. Their program status is going to be break through and compete for a Big 12 title after a few average seasons. This is a team that seems like they're always on the cusp of maybe doing something good, but then they always just kind of come back and have like the average season they had last year where they were 8-5. They make it to a bowl game almost every season recently, but they can never really. They're never in that contention for, okay, like we're thinking of Kansas State as being one of the teams competing for the Big 12 title. Their key player is going to be defensive tackle Eli Huggins. He anchors one of the best defensive lines in the FBS, so that's definitely going to be the strength of this Kansas State team, is going to be on the defensive side of the ball, which is pretty rare to say for a Big 12 team. Like I said at the beginning of the video, the Big 12 is known for, high-powered, potent offenses and not great defense. If Kansas State can put together a top defense, then that can really go a long way into helping them win some of these games amid all the uncertainty around some of the top teams. So definitely by far a key player for Kansas State. So moving on to number 4, we're going to have the Texas Longhorns, and they finished 8th in the conference last year. They were 3-6 in the conference, 5-7 overall, and I mentioned this earlier in the video. Texas, I'm really trying not to get my hopes up about them, just because this is always one of those teams that, and it seems like it's been happening a lot recently. I mean, they really just, there's always expectations around Texas because it is Texas. They're supposed to be one of the top teams in the Big 12. They're going to be going with Oklahoma to join the SEC in a few years, and, but it seems like definitely recently they've really failed to perform up to the level that everyone thinks they're going to perform up to. There's always people saying that Texas are going to do well. Most people consensually have them around this kind of 4th spot in the conference this year. When they came out with the USA Today coaches poll, there was someone who gave them a first place vote, which, I mean, if you're not giving your first place vote to like Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, like one of those teams, then I'm going to question your mental sanity, especially giving it to Texas when they're not even a top 3 team in the Big 12. That was really strange when I saw that coming out, that they received, and like they were ranked 18th in the coaches poll pretty much just because of that, because they weren't in the AP poll at the start of the year. They're not a top 25 team according to the Associated Press. So definitely interesting. They have a difficult non-conference schedule for one reason, and that is they have a home game against Alabama at the start of the year, so that's definitely going to be a difficult game. Even though they're going to be at home, I'm not sure I see them winning that game. But their key game, as always, is going to be the game against Oklahoma, the Red River Showdown. It takes place at the Cotton Bowl, the neutral site. Not the the Cotton Bowl? This doesn't take place at the Cotton Bowl. It takes place at a neutral site every year. It's the big rivalry game in the Big 12. It's a rivalry that will be continued on after, Texas and Oklahoma move to the SEC because, they're going to stick together. So that's going to be the key game for them, obviously. And it's really, outside of the Alabama game, it's the first of their, really big games in the season and their first big conference game because, they get to start out against Texas Tech and West Virginia, which are going to be, they should be 2 easier games for them. But everything really starts with that game against Oklahoma. I always like how they place it in the middle of the season. It is fun to have games at the end of the year against your big rivals, kind of like how Michigan and Ohio State always play at the end of the year, but I like when they place these games in the middle of the schedule because it can really set the tone for either team. Like, it can really propel Texas forward, and it can also really propel Oklahoma down if Oklahoma loses it. So definitely a huge game for them. They also do get to play Baylor at home this year too, so that's obviously key for them as well, to get one of the big games at home. So, but Oklahoma's still going to be the most important in my mind. So they're ranking 4th out of 10 in the experience rank. Their program status is just building a strong SEC resume because, they're not going to be joining the SEC until 2025, along with Oklahoma. But it's just, again, this is a team that seems to always have expectations, and they seem to always underperform. So it's really important for them to build a strong resume, because then there's going to be, obviously the money talks, and they're not going to get rejected by the SEC or anything because of all the money they bring in. But it's going to they're going to become a laughing stock of the SEC if they continue, having seasons like the one they had last year. The SEC is a much stronger conference than the Big 12, and if you're out here having, average subpar seasons in the Big 12, then you're going to get steamrolled when you get to the SEC. So, the teams in the SEC are a lot stronger. So definitely building a strong resume is going to be important for them, and trying to, just get back into the Big 12 title picture. Their key player is going to be running back Bijan Robinson. He is the top-rated running back in the FBS this year, the top-rated draft prospect for running backs in the FBS, so there's definitely a lot of expectations around him. A potential late first, early second round draft pick in the NFL draft next year, so he's going to want to perform well to get his stock up. And obviously it's this offense, it's a typical Big 12 team, a high-powered offense and a pretty middling defense, so the offense is going to have to carry the way and put up a lot of points for Texas. So now's when it becomes really tough for me, ranking these top three teams. They really could go either way in my mind, all of them. It's a really tough deal here. But at number 3, we're going to have the Oklahoma State Cowboys. They were, even though they lost the Big 12 title game, they were the regular season Big 12 champs. They were 8-1 in the conference, with their only loss coming to Baylor in that Big 12 title game. 12-2 overall. And the key for them, their key game is, of course, going to be same as Texas, although this one happens later in the year. This is at Oklahoma. Unfortunately for Oklahoma State, they have to go at Oklahoma and at Baylor, which is one of the reasons why I've ranked them 3rd here, just because, there's a lot of uncertainty around these teams, and I think the fact that against the other top 2 teams, they're having to go on the road against both of them, I think is a real big challenge. They do have an easy non-conference schedule, playing Central Michigan and Arizona State. So they should start out the season 3-0, heading into that game against Baylor. That obviously, it's kind of like big games. The one against Baylor is going to be huge too, because that'll set the tone. But definitely that game at the end of the year against Oklahoma, even if they lose to Baylor, if they can beat Oklahoma at the end of the year, then it should set them up nicely to go into the Big 12 title game and potentially have a shot at making the college football playoff, or getting into one of those New Year's 6 bowl games. So they're going to be ranked 7th out of 10 in the experience rank for 2022. Their program status is recovering from the Baylor loss and making it back to the title game. Unfortunately for Oklahoma State, they really had a chance to make the college football playoff last year had they just beaten Baylor. They might not have gotten in anyway because of the fact that Alabama beat Georgia in the SEC title game. So they might still not have gotten in anyway, but they had a chance, and, losing to Baylor killed any chance they had of getting in there. So definitely not good for Oklahoma State when it came to that. Their key player is going to be quarterback Spencer Sanders. He was the QB last year. He's definitely going to have to step up and perform again this year. He did really well last year. He's got some new weapons in place on offense. Like I said, this team is 7th out of 10 in the experience rank, so they did lose some players. But the offense is going to have to carry the way, because they lost a lot of pieces on defense. They only have, they've only got 4 returning starters on defense. So the offense is going to have to carry the way for them. Oklahoma State's also one of these Big 12 teams that's known for having better defense than the average for Big 12 teams. But they lost a lot of players, so the offense is going to have to carry the way. Moving on to the number 2 team, we are going to have the Baylor Bears. They were 2nd in the conference last year, 7-2 in conference play, 12-2 overall. They were the Big 12 champions, though. They won the Big 12 title game over Oklahoma State. So Baylor obviously had a really good season last year. They were able to get their first Big 12 title in quite a while. Their key game on the schedule is going to be, I mentioned this game for Oklahoma State as potentially being a key game, but it's going to be the home game against Oklahoma State on October 1st. They potentially could be 4-0 heading into this game. They do have a road game at BYU, which, if everything goes right, they should win that game, but, you never know. BYU, they can be an upset watch team. but the other two non-conference games in the game against Iowa State should all be wins. So this is like, setting the tone for Baylor for their schedule. Like, okay, if they can beat Oklahoma State, they're going to be in a real good spot, heading into the rest of their schedule. They do have to play Oklahoma on the road, so that'll be tough. But if they can beat Oklahoma State, it'll set them up nicely to get back to the Big 12 title game and potentially win the Big 12 championship again. Like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty with all these teams, so they're all going to be fun games to watch because these top three teams, you really could take them either way. There's a lot of people that are predicting Baylor to win the Big 12. It's kind of between, like, most people. I have seen a couple things say that Oklahoma State could potentially win the Big 12, but most sports writers and predictors have it between Baylor and Oklahoma, and it seems to be split 50-50. Like, maybe slightly more people are picking Oklahoma, but Baylor is definitely for sure in the conversation as to, who could potentially win the Big 12 this year. They're going to be 8th out of 10 in the experience rank. Again, like I said, this is contributing to the uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty with all these teams. Their program status is going to be a momentum from their first Big 12 title since 2014. And just building, I mentioned that Texas had to build a strong resume for the SEC. Baylor and Oklahoma State, I didn't mention this for Oklahoma State, but Oklahoma State and Baylor are really going to be the two teams that are going to be key in building a strong resume for the Big 12 as a conference because, there's been a lot of talk about the SEC and the Big 10 kind of becoming these two mega conferences and, them being like the top two conferences. Baylor and Oklahoma State are definitely going to be at the forefront of keeping the Big 12 relevant. They're bringing in a lot of new teams next season. They're bringing in UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and BYU. So, they're definitely going to have get some more respectability there. They're going to be a conference that moves from 10 teams to 14 teams. It will obviously get cut back down to 12 teams once Texas and Oklahoma leave for the SEC, but like I said, Baylor's going to be at the forefront of keeping respectability in the Big 12. If they can whip off a couple straight seasons of beating Oklahoma for the Big 12 title, that's going to go a long way for the Big 12 as a conference, because if Oklahoma keeps winning it every year, then it's going to be a bad look for the Big 12, and, Oklahoma leaving is just going to kind of leave this, dark spot over the conference. But if Baylor can, rip off some Big 12 conference titles, it's going to go a long way. Their key player is going to be defensive tackle Siaki Ika. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but, he anchors the top defensive line in the Big 12. He's basically another version of Vita Vea on the Tampa Bay Bucks. Just this big, strong, fast, hard-nosed nose tackle that, can do it all. He can rush the passer, he can stuff the run. He's a big playmaker, so he's going to be key for Baylor, trying to get this defense going again. They had one of the better defenses in the Big 12 last year, and amid all the uncertainty, you really want to have a strong defense amid uncertainty in your program, so he's definitely going to be the anchor for that. And finally, by process of elimination, at number 1 is going to be the Oklahoma Sooners. They were 3rd in the conference last year, 7-2 overall, 7-2 in conference play, 11-2 overall. And the thing for Oklahoma, to me, they're kind of like the old reliable here. Like I said, all the uncertainty, all like who should win the conference, between the big three, and I just got to go with my gut and pick the old favorite, Oklahoma. The main reason for them, why I'm picking them to win, is because they get to play both Baylor and Oklahoma State at home. They don't have to go on the road against them. Their toughest road game this year is going to be like at TCU or at Iowa State, Like, they play Texas at a neutral site, but they don't really have any substantially tough road games this year, which is a huge benefit for them. The fact that the cycle has just fallen to where they get to play both of them at home. They get to play Kansas State at home this year, too, so Oklahoma definitely has a favorable schedule. Their non-conference schedule isn't really terrible. UTEP and Kent State, they were two better teams last year, but they get both of them at home. Nebraska's kind of got uncertainty around them. They were like a really good team that lost a lot of games last year, so they're hoping to rebound. But the schedule is just too favorable for Oklahoma in my mind to not pick them to win when they have all these home games. Of course, the other teams could still upset them. There's no question about that, but they definitely have the scheduling advantage here, and when teams are so close like this, I think that makes a huge difference. They're going to be 6 out of the 10 teams in the experience rank. Now, the downside of why a lot of people might not be picking them to win is, of course, they have a new head coach, Brent Venables. You know, Lincoln Riley left for that huge payday over at USC. You know, they just got to take advantage of a wide-open Big 12. They also have a new quarterback. You know, they lost both Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams to the transfer portal, so they brought in a transfer of their own, Dylan Gabriel from UCF. You know, he's going to be the key for this offense to make up for those losses, and, you know, it's just, for Oklahoma, it's just about, like, you know, win the games that you're supposed to win, and just kind of, you know, don't change too much from this, you know, from what you've been doing for the past, you know, long while. You know, they've been the only team from the Big 12 to ever make it to the college football playoff. They've, you know, won every Big 12 title since the reintroduction of the Big 12 title game, except for last year. You know, they still haven't won a game in the college football playoff yet, but like I said, they're the only team to make it. So Oklahoma really just kind of has to, you know, stay the course. Like, you know, get back to what makes them the top team in the Big 12, and just don't, you know, win the games that you're supposed to win, and just take it from there. So thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you leave down in the comments below whether you agree, disagree with my rankings. Like I said, these could all be, you know, really different by the time I come back and look at them again once the season's over, just because of how wide open this conference is. But make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell so you can get notified for all of our new videos. And until then, I will see you guys next time.